Welcome everyone to my talk today, ICS Security Operations, Active Defense Concept with Effective Incident Response in Industrial Control Systems. This is John Kurnaz. My name is pronounced as John, which is pretty close in English to John. And I am working as a OT security consultant, and I have GICSB, OICP, OSWPN certified ethical hacker certifications. My bachelor is computer engineering and my master is cybersecurity. And you can reach me on Twitter and LinkedIn and GitHub, as you can see here. I am, of course, a bit nervous about the presentation, and let's take a deep breath and have some relaxation, then we can continue. Okay, what's today's agenda? So I will discuss a bit on active defense concept, and I will explain briefly threat intelligence, asset identification and network security monitoring, incident response for ICS, and then taking the advantage of found threats. So what is active defense concept? It is something like this, yes, improvising, adapting, and overcoming as bear drills. But yeah, it is also related to this picture. But in general, what I can explain is somewhere in the middle in here in the picture, it is the process of analysts monitoring for, responding to, and learning from adversaries internal to the network. So basically that means it is a combination of analyzing the adversaries steps and monitoring constantly to the internal network. And then when you see any anomalies, responding to that. And basically when you see any action, basically create lessons learned and learn from the adversaries. It is not deployable by itself, of course. It is built on the top of the good practices, such as good architecture, and then the passive defense. And it's not definitely a hackback. So you need to stay on your internal network to protect, and you don't have to attack back to the adversaries, of course. So why active defense is needed? As we can see, at least for a couple of years, traditional methods of protection without constant human interaction, such as firewalls, IPS, and antiviruses, only provides a certain level of security. And adversaries are getting stronger and stronger every day, and the passive defense usually don't stop them, unfortunately. So when we take a look to the active cyber defense cycle, it consists of four elements: threat intelligent conception, and asset identification and network security monitoring, then incident response when it's necessary, and using threat and environment manipulation to get over the adversaries. Basically, this diagram is coming from the SANS and the references down there. So basically, the idea is monitoring your area of responsibility, which is quite necessary to at least have the, let's say, idea of the getting the baselines, then checking the anomalies. And that said, implementing monitoring will bring you the chance for quick response when it's necessary, when you see something odd. And responding to incidents and attacks on time is, of course, crucial, because especially on the industrial control systems, if it affects the industrial control network, it's going to cost you a lot. And constant changes are necessary, since you need to beat the adversaries and kick them out of your industrial control network. And after that, you need to share and you need to consume the lessons learned. At least you need to share with the community, and you need to observe and collect the lessons learned from the community to develop better defenses on your systems, on your ICS. So what is threat intelligence? I'm trying to explain this pretty quick. Let's start with the intelligence. So intelligence basically means the process of collecting data, turning into information, and producing an assessment that satisfies a previously identified knowledge gap. So you need to obtain the from the raw data to important information. So normally you can do yeah, everybody can say yeah you can do this with the tools, but unfortunately tools can only help, and your analysts can create intelligence, not the tools. And intelligence life cycle, when we take a look to the intelligence life cycle, it starts with planning and direction, then collection, then processing and exploitation. Exploitation here means doesn't look like the exploitation in the computer science. It is more like clarifying and filtering the information that you need that it that make it useful, and then analysis and production, and dissemination and integration. Basically, the intelligent life cycle consists of these elements. And then if we discuss about the open source intelligence, it is a type of intelligence which is quite useful for adversaries as well as also for you. It is low cost and low impact, but it gives essential information about you. So most of the time, adversaries are Googling on the internet, and checking related documents and data about you. But you can also use this as your own beneficial by checking these documents and trying to reduce your threat landscape. Normally, these sources can be public relation documents that your or partnership announcements that you share. Most of the time, these documents are not considered dangerous, but they are dangerous because they contains valuable information. Company information, of course. The if the company is a public company and if the company shares monthly or quarterly or I don't know annual reports, these reports also have valuable information about the company. Most of the time, job descriptions basically leak the technologies, of course, and advisories and alerts sometimes also might be related to your systems and give some hints about your systems, and of course, your internet connected devices. These are the most dangerous things. So, threat intelligence, if you continue with the threat intelligence, in simple terms, again, threat intelligence is analyze information related to adversaries that have intent, capability, and opportunity to harm you. So, that specific type of intelligence give defenders knowledge of the adversary, their actions within the defender's environment, and the capabilities as well as their tactics, techniques, and procedures. And the threat intelligence is often shared in different methods. For example, indicators of compromise, IOCs, as I mentioned, tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, and oftentimes complete report about an incident or an attack. And what do we need to do to identify our threat landscape? Threat landscape is a combination of information attack space, threat groups, industry, and non-technical influences. So basically, to identify your threat landscape, you need to ask yourself who is interested to attack your organization and why. What would be the reason of causing damage, and how can they get into your organization? And after you identify the threat landscape, you need to reduce the threat landscape. And most of the times, asset and network identification is necessary to succeed. First of all, you need to clarify your external and internal landscapes because you need to focus on your responsibility areas, and as well as you would have some connections from third party vendors or any other third party service providers, etc. Then using known information, you need to uh, try to reduce your threat landscape basically by checking these information and trying to prevent any leaking information like that, and performing assessments and measurements also with the third party companies or external companies, because sometimes you need to have a second opinion or second eye to check that. And after that, you need to continue doing these again and again to reduce your landscape. And external threat intelligence is the threat intelligence comes from the specialized teams, which can be professional services companies such as Dragos, and or it could be from ICS certs such and other certs. Basically, provides indicator of compromises and TTPs, and most of the time it is for large audiences. It might not be relevant for you, but still it is important to follow these threat intelligence reports. Um, but sometimes, of course, the industry is not relevant for you and you don't need to take an action. But oftentimes, ICS threat intelligence are limited. It's really hard to find, especially purely ICS threat intelligence. But when you find it, it's priceless, really priceless. And ICS cert, multiple ISACs and all the ISACs can provide. Sans Internet Storm Center also providing threat intelligence, threat feeds, and reports from vendors and professional service companies, as I mentioned, like from Mandiant or from Dragos, for example, or FireEye. And what is internal threat intelligence? And internal threat intelligence comes from your data. It is usable against the current problems in your environment because the data is just coming from your environment, and after you analyze, you basically realized there are some problems and it's directly relevant to your issues. But it requires personnel in order to do the analysis, and it requires specialized skills such as malware and threat analysis. And if you summarize the threat intelligence, tactical threat intelligence contains TTPs and IOCs, which are quite useful to add, change, and implement your defense, or at least search for intrusions in your environment. And strategic threat intelligence can be used to look overall patterns, suspected attribution, trends, and themes. It is also useful to identify where your defense might fail or already failing. So if you go for asset identification and network security monitoring, the purpose and importance of the asset identification is it is really hard to defend if you don't know what you have in your plant, in your facility, or in your environment in general. Because if you don't know what's there, you cannot protect it, basically. And advanced security solutions that you have also not effective if you can't provide the whole map to defend. So you need to at least provide the fundamental security to have this. And network security monitoring, threat intelligence, and instant response usually works better if you have the network knowledge, if you have internal network knowledge. And how do we identify the assets in the ICS network then? We can say first we need to start determining the area of responsibility, because as I mentioned, most of the times there are some remote connections that you shouldn't include because yeah, of course, VPN endpoints on your side that can be count on your responsibility, but still there are some ways that goes to outbound and not in your responsibility anymore. And then finding and utilizing the existing information. For example, if you already have some network diagrams that you have, you need to start with this. Then you can validate known information. And if it's not sufficient, and if you think you need to, let's say, create a new one, you can try to collect by doing physical inspection, which is normally a bit harder and takes much more time. You can do traffic analysis in your ICS network, passive analysis that we can also say. We can do configuration file analysis, and we can do active scanning, which is not recommended, except you're, let's say, you are not in production, or if you are on the if you're in the turnaround, you can do that, but otherwise it's a bit dangerous. And then collecting the data in all the assets, you need to document it again in order to have a nicely done diagram and have the all the assets. And unfortunately, most of the ICS networks are flat networks. You'll notice that once you've done the asset identification, Um, After identifying the assets, it's often required to have a physical or logical separation or both. It is quite necessary since it makes more difficult to adversaries to pivot in your network. Otherwise, if it's flat network, normally a game would be over within, let's say, half an hour or 1 hour. For the active defense concept, it is really crucial because you need to build on top of the good architecture and passive defense. Um, at least for me, the aim would be separating the network as explained in Purview model. So it could be a good reference to start with, and then if you want to have more separation, then you can use microsegmentation, etc. But it is the fundamental for the ICS networks. And network security monitoring is a continuous process to collect, detect, analyze indication of threats in order to respond faster to incidents and attacks in your network. It is threat-centric approach instead of traditional vulnerability-centric approach. Network security monitoring requires dedicated personnel as analysts, and it also requires preparation for infrastructure and also tools ahead of time. And it brings proactive approach to security and detection of the threats. So um, you can take some remediations once you identify the issues in your network. And network security monitoring provides visibility and helps you to identify the changes and anomalies might not be relevant to only adversaries, but also some misconfigurations for troubleshooting misconfigurations. And it helps you to detect intrusion attempts and movements within SCADA, ICS SCADA networks. And it can evaluate separation and segregation for levels that you have and zones that you have. And it can help fine-tuning and validating the settings of passive defense elements. For example, checking the firewall rules and to see if it's correctly implemented or missing some points, etc. And it also can help reduce the threat landscape by hardening non-required ports and services, since you are seeing this when you are doing the network security monitoring, and you can instantly take remediation. Network security monitoring is more useful in ICS networks since most of the assets are critical, and most of the times all the assets or any assets cannot be immediately patched because, yeah, we know ICS networks are quite, let's say, untouchable, and then you need to have any other layer to have the protection for your endpoints, etc. And ICS networks have many dependencies and connections, such as enterprise network connection, vendor connections, business applications, contractor VPNs, and it is really valuable to monitor these external parties for anomalies because once your vendor or once your contractor, let's say, compromised, it is just a moment to jump into your network by using these VPNs, and normally you don't have any vision on these connections without the active defense. And detection approaches, most of the time, what we check is identifying the most used IP addresses and ports used within the network to create basically a baseline, identifying biggest bandwidth users, identifying encrypted communication, because most of the times command and conquer centers are using encrypted communications, and identifying the critical assets and usual traffic is also important to continue on the baseline to have a stability on that, and identifying network anomalies, of course, and identifying lowest bandwidth and communication, because sometimes you can see in the network unusual traffic which could be pretty less than your usual levels. And of course, you need to identify exfiltration. You need to check that when you are doing the detection. And asset identification and network security monitoring takeaways. Asset identification and network security monitoring is the key for active defense concept, Network security monitoring is a great approach for ICS because most of the ICS networks are quite stable, and basically you can once you create a baseline, it is easy to let's say monitor. And these two elements support implementation of better architecture and passive defense. Once you implement that, yeah, you can take a look back and you can, let's say, improve your basic fundamental security also. Detection often relies on the sensors and ICS network. You need to be sure that you need to detect the baseline changes, anomalies, and IDS rules, because these can basically warn you when you are doing the detection. And logs and visibility are really important, but yeah, you need to have an analyst to, let's say, contribute value on that, because by itself logs and visibility doesn't give you the chance that you can prevent. An analyst need to follow it constantly and verify it if there is any anomaly. And network security monitoring will eventually lead to incident response. You need to be ready for incident response. By saying that incident response for ICS, it is a bit different comparing to usual IT incident response, because um, you can simply you cannot simply bring down the systems during the incident response when you're working on ICS networks. And the focus is a bit different, by saying that maintaining safe and reliable operations is the most important thing, acquiring meaningful forensic data within a limited time, performing timely analysis, and containing and eradicating the threats. Basically, these are the four elements that you need to follow when you're doing the ICS incident response. Before that, preparation, there are some steps that you need to follow. Preparation, same as traditional IT, but with some limitations such as testing tools, testing methods, but in a lab. Integrated detection and identification, working with network security monitoring team to implement rules and detection capabilities, which is tailored to the threat in order to identify impacted systems. And evidence acquisition. Normally you don't have that much time, like on IT side. You don't have that much of time to deep the forensic analysis, because you cannot stop the operations. Here the focus is maintaining operations while acquiring enough evidence to perform later. You will do the deep forensic analysis later. And time critical analysis, using fast and well tested techniques to quickly determine the overall impact to the operations. And supported activities, IR teams mostly share information and evidence. All the evidence should be passed to other teams to begin deep analysis and continue on the active defense cycle. And containment, preserving the operations by collaborating with other teams, operators, and also engineers on the field. Eradication and recovery, you need to neutralize the threat by, for example, reimagining the systems, reinstalling known good software, implementing patches. And then you need to provide the lessons learned, which is documents, finding for all past information to the network security monitoring team in order to identify and see if there is any reinfection, etc. And how do you prepare an incident response team? You need to determine the requirements and dependencies within your facility. For example, uptime, availability, and specific systems you need to take care. You need to decide if it's going to be in-house or outsourced. There are some advantages on both sides, but yeah, you need to decide, at least have a couple of people in your facility to do it more faster. A team size, 3, 4 well-trained people on site would be enough to cover, but you also need to think about the shifts, etc. So in total, it needs to be at least 8 to 10 people. So chain of command is really important, because there will be chaos and someone needs to communicate with the management team, etc. And it should be incident response director. Then all the evidence and incident handlers need to report to lead responder, and the chain of command needs to go up and down like this. And to build your ICS incident response team, you need to find the right personnel. Of course, it's the hardest part, because incident response is really tough subject to focus and develop yourself. And then also you need to take care of your jump kits, because often jump kits, when you need it during the incident, most of the time you are losing some parts from the jump kit. It's easy to borrow from the jump kit, and then when you go to the incident, you are missing a couple of hard disks, etc. when you need it on over there. So it's important. So evidence acquisition, sorry. You need to take care of the order of volatility, and you need to decide if it's going to be local or remote acquisition. I would prefer local because it's less risk and more faster. The tools should be tested before on the systems, because we are not talking about regular IT systems. Acquisition should be coordinated with all involved personnel, and you need to discuss beforehand when you are touching any field device with engineers and operators. You need to gather all the evidence if the time permits. You need to start from registry and then any memory, and then taking the disk images, for example. And you need to take necessary photos in order to see on the let's say devices. If you see any command prompt, you need to have an evidence, because once you turn it off, you will lose it, or you can lose it in any second. And all the data should be analyzed in an approved facility. What are the sources for the forensic data in ICS networks? Highly volatile data, system memory, network information, and system processes, and VPN connections, and these logs, and registry hives, HMIs, mostly Windows computers, and you can have system logs, etc. Engineering workstations, controllers such as PLCs and RTUs, and sometimes virtual resources, such as VMs and cloud environment if it's connected. And you need to do the high quality incident response in a timely manner. It's really important in ICS when you are doing this. Timely analysis is important to keep operations safe and reliable. It should focus on understanding the scope and then the type of incident. And the baseline information comparison will be really helpful when you do that. And focusing on the new connections, increase in the bandwidth, new routes, anomalies in the VPN connections, change register keys, spawn processes. You need to check these first. And asset identification and network security monitoring help to respond quickly. And utilize good tools to reduce the analysis period. This is also important. You need to do the practice before going to the real incident. And how do you use threat intelligence in the incident response? Indicator of compromise to scope the infected systems. Then after that, you need to identify the network data on host, and TTPs to identify adversary efforts. And you need to utilize to ensure threats are gone after you've done the incident response. And incident response takeaways. You need to focus on providing actionable information about the scope of the threat and its potential impacts while you're acquiring the evidence without breaking operations and safety. ICS incident response should be tailor-made. It's a bit different than the IT, as I mentioned. Efforts must align with the goals and requirements of the operations. This is the first priority. Preparation should be done ahead of time. You really need to practice before it really happens. And acquired evidence and lessons learned should be shared with other personnel. So once you get evidence, you need to share it to complete, to move forward the active defense cycle. And let's summarize this. Taking the advantage of the found threats. Once you complete the incident response, if we can safely interact and understand with the threat, we can have the best source of defense information from the adversary's best capability. We can feed the active cyber defense center with the found threat intelligence to build better defense. It is important to identify and use indicator of compromises from the threats to help incident response. And understanding the malware's tactics to identify weaknesses in the current ICS architecture is valuable because after that you need to improve your architecture. So these steps are really valuable. And my last presentation is about lessons learned sessions for long-term success. For the success of active defense, active cyber defense cycle, lessons learned should be shared within the teams internally, and also necessary actions needs to be taken to build better defense. And after that, either during the incident and after the incident. And after that, once you share it internally, it's also recommended to share your lessons learned in appropriate way with the ICS community, because if you had that threat, someone else might get this soon. So it is really important and valuable. And yeah, I think I'm just on time. Thank you very much for listening me. If you have any questions, either you can send me a message from LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can ask now. Thank you.
John, this is
In there.
okay. So everybody, look forward to see John and ask questions and all sorts of different things on the DEF CON Discord server. We're in the ICS Village subgroup. And John, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.